The emergency session in the Pentagon's deepest level had been going for 6 hours. President Nathan Cross sat at the head of the table, looking older than his 55 years. Around him, the most powerful military leaders on Earth argued about humanity's impossible situation. "We have 12 million people in the armed forces," General Susan Cole said, spreading holographic reports across the table. "The Galactic Council is asking us to fight a war across hundreds of star systems. The math doesn't work." Admiral Kevin Shaw shook his head firmly. "The math doesn't matter if we're all dead. The swarm is heading toward Earth. Every intelligence report confirms it. We fight now, or we get consumed like everyone else." Captain Ryan Bell stood near the wall display showing Earth's current fleet positions. Most of the ships were designed for exploration and peaceful contact with alien species. Only a few hundred vessels were built for actual combat. "The real problem isn't numbers," he said quietly. "It's doctrine. Everything we know about warfare assumes coordination and support. Now we're being told that coordination will get us killed." Dr. Martin Beck, Earth's leading expert on human psychology, activated his presentation. Charts and graphs filled the air showing brain scans and behavioral studies. "The preliminary data is fascinating," he said. "Humans tested in isolation show increased creative problem-solving, faster decision-making, and higher stress tolerance than those working in groups." "That can't be right," protested General Cole. "Every military in history has been built on teamwork and coordination. You can't fight a war with individuals running around doing whatever they want." "Actually, you can," said Commander Lisa Ward from her position near the data terminals. She had been analyzing the reports from humanity's first swarm encounters. "Look at the Proxima Centauri engagement. 3 ships coordinating through normal channels were compromised in minutes. One ship fighting alone destroyed the entire swarm patrol." President Cross rubbed his temples. The stress of the past week was showing on his face. "Explain to me how Captain Morgan succeeded where a coordinated attack failed." Commander Ward brought up the tactical display. "At 14:30 ship time, the destroyer Courage lost all communication with the fleet. Standard procedure would be to retreat and re-establish contact. Instead, Captain Morgan analyzed the situation independently and decided to continue the attack. The display showed the path of the lone human ship as it maneuvered through the battle zone. Unlike the predictable patterns of coordinated fleets, Morgan's movements seemed random and chaotic. The swarm couldn't predict his actions because he wasn't following any established tactical doctrine," Ward continued. "He made split-second decisions based on his personal assessment of the situation. No communication delays, no committee decisions, no coordination protocols. Just one human mind reacting to threats as they appeared." Admiral Shaw leaned forward. "Are you saying our most experienced commanders have been doing it wrong for centuries?" "Against normal enemies, coordination works perfectly," Dr. Beck answered. "But the Void Swarm isn't normal. They feed on the mental connections that make coordination possible. The stronger the connection, the faster they can corrupt it." General Cole pulled up Earth's military organizational charts. "This is insane. You're asking us to throw away everything we know about warfare. How do you command troops who can't communicate with each other? How do you coordinate attacks when coordination is forbidden?" "You don't," said Captain Bell simply. "You give individual commanders objectives and let them figure out how to achieve them. No oversight, no support, no backup plans. Just humans making human decisions in isolation." The room fell silent as everyone contemplated what this meant. President Cross finally spoke. "What about the psychological impact? Soldiers need to know their comrades are watching their backs. They need to feel connected to their units and their cause. Dr. Beck activated another display showing psychological profiles of successful isolated operators. Interestingly, humans seem to adapt better to isolation than any other species we've studied. Our ancestors survived as small groups in hostile environments. We evolved the ability to function independently when necessary. But at what cost? Asked General Cole. I've seen what happens to soldiers who spend too much time alone in combat zones. Post-traumatic stress, depression, inability to reintegrate with society. Are we willing to sacrifice the mental health of our entire military? Commander Ward brought up casualty projections. According to Galactic Intelligence, the swarm will reach Earth in 18 months if their current expansion rate continues. We can worry about psychological problems after we make sure there are humans left to have them. President Cross stood up and walked to the window overlooking the Potomac River. Outside, life continued normally. People went to work. Children played in parks, and nobody knew that humanity was about to become the galaxy's last line of defense. What do we need to implement this new doctrine? He asked without turning around. Admiral Shaw consulted his notes. First, we need to identify soldiers who can function effectively in isolation. Not everyone will be able to handle it. We're looking for people who think independently, adapt quickly, and don't crack under pressure. Second, continued General Cole reluctantly, we need to redesign our entire command structure. No more fleet operations, no more coordinated attacks, no more joint missions. Every engagement becomes a solo operation with one person making all the decisions. Captain Bell stepped forward. We'll need new ship designs too. Current vessels are built for crew cooperation. We need ships that can be operated effectively by one person, with automated systems handling everything that usually requires teamwork. Dr. Beck added his requirements. Intensive psychological training will be essential. We need to condition soldiers to trust their own judgment over group consensus. We need to teach them to thrive in isolation rather than just survive it. President Cross turned back to face the room. What about our allies, the other species that depend on us? They provide resources, intelligence, and logistical support, Admiral Shaw replied. But they can't enter active combat zones. The moment they try to help us directly, they become liabilities. We fight alone, or we all die together. The weight of that statement settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Humanity was about to become the loneliest species in the galaxy, carrying the burden of defending everyone while being unable to accept help from anyone. There's something else, Commander Ward said quietly. The alien species are already starting to see us differently. Before, we were the chaotic newcomers who couldn't organize properly. Now, they're realizing that our chaos might be evolution's answer to threats they never imagined. General Cole looked at the deployment schedules on her tablet. How do we explain this to our people? How do we tell soldiers that everything they've trained for is now obsolete? How do we ask them to fight battles where backup is forbidden and teamwork is death? We tell them the truth, President Cross said firmly. We tell them that humanity's greatest perceived weakness has become our greatest strength. We tell them that the fate of galactic civilization depends on our ability to do what no other species can do, stand alone against the dark. Dr. Beck pulled up one final chart showing human adaptation rates. The remarkable thing is that early test subjects are actually showing improved performance under isolation protocols. It's as if humans were designed for this kind of warfare, even though we never knew it. Admiral Shaw stood up and saluted the president. "Sir, I recommend we begin immediate implementation of the solo combat doctrine. We start with volunteers and expand as quickly as possible. The galaxy doesn't have time for us to be cautious." President Cross returned the salute. "Authorization granted. Ladies and gentlemen, we are about to ask the impossible of our military forces. They will fight alone, decide alone, and possibly die alone. But they will do it to save not just humanity, but every species in the galaxy." As the meeting ended and officers hurried off to begin the greatest military transformation in human history, one thought echoed in every mind. Humanity was about to discover whether their individualism was a gift or a curse. The survival of galactic civilization would depend on the answer. The Great Hall of the Galactic Council stretched for miles under a dome of pure crystal. Representatives from hundreds of worlds sat in their designated sections, each species bringing their own atmosphere and gravity fields. Ambassador Kelly. Martinez adjusted her breathing mask and looked around at the alien faces surrounding her. In her 2 years representing Earth, she had never seen them look so afraid. The Altarian delegate stood at the center podium, her silver skin shimmering. As she spoke, "The Void Swarm has consumed the Kepler system," she announced, her voice carrying through translation devices. "All 17 colonies are gone. Our fleet of 300 ships lasted less than 6 hours. Kelly felt her stomach drop. The Altarians had the most advanced military in the galaxy. Their ships moved like dancers, perfectly coordinated through their shared mind link. If they could not stop this threat, what hope did anyone have? Admiral Jake Thompson leaned forward in his seat next to Kelly. His weathered face showed the strain of the past few months. "How many ships did they lose?" he whispered. "None," the Altarian continued. "The swarm turned our vessels against each other. Our mind link became a weapon in their hands. Ships that had fought together for decades suddenly attacked their wingmates. We had to retreat before losing everything." A low rumble came from the Corvin section. These wolf-like beings were the fiercest warriors known to the galaxy. Their pack-hunting methods had conquered dozens of worlds. General Vex High stood up, his fangs visible as he spoke. "The same happened to us at Wolf 359, he growled. "Our hunting packs became confused. Warriors who had fought side by side for years turned on each other. The swarm somehow used our pack bonds against us. We lost half our fleet before we understood what was happening." More reports followed. The crystal beings of Nexus reported their hive mind being invaded and corrupted. The peaceful traders of the Epsilon Alliance described their cooperative crews becoming violent and chaotic. Every species had the same story. The moment they engaged the Void Swarm, their greatest strengths became fatal weaknesses. Dr. Linda Pierce stood up from the human section. She was a small woman with tired eyes, but her voice carried clearly through the vast hall. "We have been studying the captured swarm material for 3 months, she said. "The results are disturbing. The Void Swarm feeds on mental connections between beings of the same species. They consume the bonds that hold crews and armies together." The hall fell silent. Kelly could hear her own heartbeat in the sudden quiet. "The stronger the mental link, the faster the corruption spreads," Dr. Pierce continued. "Species with telepathic abilities are compromised within minutes. Those with strong pack instincts last perhaps an hour. Hive minds are taken over almost instantly. The swarm turns every form of cooperation into a weapon against itself." Ambassador Zenith of the Crystalline Collective projected a thought image into the hall. It showed the mathematical beauty of their shared consciousness. Millions of minds, working as one perfect system. Then the image changed, showing that same system twisted and corrupted, turning crystal warriors against their own kind. The question before us is simple, Zenith communicated to all present. How does one fight an enemy that makes cooperation impossible? How does any civilization survive when unity becomes death? Kelly felt all eyes in the hall turning toward the human section. She had dreaded this moment since the first reports came in. Dr. Pierce cleared her throat and activated the holographic display above the podium. There is one species in this galaxy that shows resistance to swarm corruption, she said quietly. Humans have been observed fighting effectively even when completely cut off from their command structure. In fact, statistical analysis shows they perform better when isolated. The hall erupted in noise. Dozens of species began talking at once through their translation devices. Kelly heard words like impossible and unnatural repeated in 100 different alien languages. Admiral Thompson stood up slowly. His uniform bore the scars of 40 years of military service. "It's true," he said, his voice cutting through the chaos. Human soldiers who get separated from their units don't panic like other species. They adapt. They keep fighting. Sometimes they fight better alone than they do in groups. "But how is this possible?" asked Commander Yelsina of the Empathic Union. Her species could feel the emotions of every being around them. "How does any intelligent life function without connection to its own kind?" Dr. Pierce brought up another display showing human brain scans. Humans evolved differently than most galactic species. We developed in small, competing groups rather than unified collectives. Our ancestors survived by being suspicious of outsiders, even other humans. We learned to think independently, to make decisions without consulting others, to fight alone when necessary. "This is why human military tactics seem so chaotic to us," added General Vexhai thoughtfully. "We assumed it was primitive behavior, but perhaps it is adaptation to a different kind of threat." Kelly knew what was coming next. She had seen the classified reports from Earth's first encounters with swarm scouts. 3 human ships had engaged a swarm patrol near Proxima Centauri. Following standard procedure, they had tried to coordinate their attack through radio communication. Within minutes, 2 ships were compromised and turned against the third. But then something unexpected happened. The third ship, the destroyer Courage, lost all communication with the other vessels. Captain Morgan should have retreated according to military doctrine. Instead, he continued the fight alone. Without any coordination or backup, he managed to destroy all 3 swarm vessels, including the 2 compromised human ships. The report had been classified because Earth's military leaders could not explain how 1 ship succeeded where 3 had failed. Now, sitting in this hall surrounded by desperate aliens, Kelly finally understood. "The Galactic Council faces an extinction-level threat," announced the Prime Speaker, a being of pure energy who served as the Council's leader. "Traditional military doctrine has proven useless against the Void Swarm. We must consider all options, no matter how unconventional." Ambassador Martinez felt the weight of 1,000 alien gazes upon her. These species had built galactic civilization through cooperation, shared wisdom, and collective action. They had explored the stars together, traded knowledge freely, and defended each other against countless threats. Now their greatest strength was killing them. "Humanity offers its full support to the war effort," Kelly said, her voice steadier than she felt. "But you must understand what you are asking. If human tactics are the only thing that works against the swarm, then humans will have to fight this war alone. Every battle, every mission, every engagement will be carried out by isolated soldiers with no backup and no support. The hall fell silent again. The implications were clear. Humanity, the youngest member of galactic civilization, would bear the entire burden of defending it. And they would have to do it in the most unnatural way possible for any social species, completely alone. Prime Speaker's energy form pulsed slowly as he considered the situation. Then we face a choice between extinction and survival. The Galactic Council hereby authorizes humanity to develop new tactical doctrines for combating the Void Swarm threat. May the universe forgive us for what we are about to ask of your species. Kelly looked around the hall one more time. Every alien face showed the same expression of desperate hope mixed with guilt. They were asking humanity to save them all by becoming something no species should have to become. Warriors who fought alone in the dark. Lieutenant Chris Morgan felt more alone than any human being in history. His frigate Defiance drifted silently through the outer edge of the Kepler 442 system, where 3 swarm scout ships had been detected 2 days ago. Behind him, Earth's entire fleet waited at a safe distance, but they might as well have been on the other side of the galaxy. His orders were clear: engage the enemy alone, maintain complete radio silence, and document everything for future solo operations. The ship's AI spoke in its calm, emotionless voice. Lieutenant, Standard Fleet Doctrine would recommend at least 12 support vessels for this engagement. Current support vessel count, 0. I know, Alice, Morgan replied, checking his weapon systems one more time. Remind me again why that's supposed to be a good thing. Void Swarm corruption spreads through mental connections between crew members and coordinated communications between vessels. Isolation prevents corruption, the AI responded. However, isolation also eliminates tactical support, backup systems, and emergency assistance. Morgan laughed, though there was no humor in it. So either I get my mind taken over by alien parasites, or I face them completely alone with no help. Great options. Through the viewport, he could see the dim glow of the infected planets ahead. Intelligence reports described worlds where the swarm had consumed every living thing, leaving behind empty husks that somehow still moved. Entire civilizations reduced to puppets dancing for alien masters. Contact, announced Alice. 3 vessels bearing 045 Mark 12. Configuration matches Swarm Scout class. They are moving to intercept. Morgan's hands moved automatically to the controls. Months of solo training had taught him to trust his instincts over tactical manuals. Where a fleet commander would call for coordination and support, he simply acted. The first swarm ship appeared on his screen like a nightmare made real. It looked more grown than built, with organic curves and surfaces that seemed to pulse with their own life. As it approached, Morgan felt a strange pressure in his mind, like someone trying to whisper thoughts that weren't his own. Attempting. Neural contact, Alice reported. Swarm communication pattern detected. Recommend immediate evasive action. But Morgan did something no other species had tried. Instead of fighting the mental pressure, he examined it. The whispers in his mind were trying to connect him to something vast and hungry, but they couldn't find the right connection points. His human brain was like a lock they didn't have the key for. They're trying to link up with other minds, he realized. But there's only one mind here. Mine. And I'm not sharing. He fired the Defiance's main guns not because tactical doctrine demanded it, but because every human instinct told him to destroy the thing trying to get inside his head. The energy beam struck the swarm ship's hull, burning through its organic armor with satisfying violence. The second ship tried a different approach, releasing what looked like spores or seeds into space around the Defiance. Morgan watched them drift toward his ship and felt the mental pressure increase. The whispers became more urgent, more demanding. "Multiple neural contact attempts detected," Alice warned. "Crew members of other species would be compromised within 30 seconds of exposure." "Good thing I'm not other species," Morgan muttered, spinning his ship through a barrel roll that would have been impossible to coordinate with a fleet. The maneuver brought him behind the second swarm vessel, where he unleashed every weapon the Defiance carried. But it was the third ship that taught him the most important lesson. Instead of attacking directly, it hung back and observed. Morgan could feel it studying him, trying to understand why its mental attacks weren't working. The pressure in his mind changed, becoming more focused and intense. "It's learning," he said aloud. "It's trying to figure out how human minds work." That's when inspiration struck. Morgan did something that would have gotten him court-martialed. In any normal engagement, he shut down his ship's defensive systems and accelerated directly toward the third swarm vessel. No sane fleet commander would approve such a reckless attack, but Morgan wasn't operating under fleet command. He was operating under human instinct. The swarm ship, apparently confused by this suicidal approach, hesitated for a crucial second. That was all Morgan needed. He fired the Defiance's entire missile payload at point-blank range, destroying both ships in a blast that nearly took his own vessel with it. As the debris cleared, Morgan found himself floating alone in space, surrounded by the wreckage of 3 enemy ships. No backup had arrived because none was coming. No rescue ships stood by because none were allowed. For the first time in galactic warfare history, a single pilot had engaged multiple enemy vessels and won. 200 light-years away, Sergeant Amy Clark was learning the same lessons on the ground. Her squad had landed on the infected colony, world of New Brisbane 3 hours ago, with orders that defied every military principle. Maintain minimal communication, operate as individuals, and trust personal judgment over group consensus. The colony's main settlement looked normal from a distance, but as Clark's squad moved closer, the wrongness became apparent. People walked through the streets in perfect synchronization, their movements unnaturally coordinated. When one turned their head, they all turned their heads. When one raised their hand, they all raised their hands. Swarm ground infiltration. "Confirmed," Clark spoke into her helmet comm. "The colonists are still alive, but they're not in control anymore. Her 8 squad members spread out according to the new doctrine, far enough apart that they couldn't see each other, close enough to cover the same objective. Each Marine would make independent decisions about how to proceed. No coordination, no mutual support, no shared tactical awareness." Clark felt the mental pressure as soon as she entered the settlement. It was subtler than what Morgan had experienced in space, more like a gentle suggestion than a demanding whisper. The voice in her mind wanted her to join the coordinated movement of the colonists, to become part of their perfect unity. "Nice try," she said to the empty air, and kicked down the door of the nearest building. Inside, she found a family of 4 sitting around their dining table, eating a meal in perfect unison. They chewed at exactly the same rate, swallowed at exactly the same moment, and reached for their drinks with identical movements. When they saw Clark, they all smiled the same smile and spoke the same words in perfect harmony. "Join us," they said as one voice. Unity is peace. Connection is strength. Individual thought is suffering. Clark raised her rifle and fired 3 shots into the ceiling. The family didn't flinch, didn't react, didn't even blink. They just kept smiling and speaking. Join us. Unity is peace. Connection is strength. That's when Clark understood why other species fell so quickly to swarm corruption. The offer was tempting. No more difficult decisions, no more loneliness, no more responsibility. Just peaceful unity with everyone around you. But Clark was human, and humans had spent thousands of years learning to be suspicious of anyone who offered easy answers. Instead of joining the perfect unity, she planted her demolition charges and moved to the next building. Across the settlement, her squad members were making the same choice. Private Rodriguez ignored the whispers and cleared his assigned sector. Corporal Johnson felt the mental pressure and responded by working faster, not slower. Lance Corporal Peterson found a group of swarm creatures trying to coordinate an ambush and eliminated them one by one without calling for backup. When the charges detonated an hour later, destroying the swarm nest beneath the settlement, 8 separate humans had acted independently to achieve the same goal. No coordination, no communication, no shared plan. Just individual human minds choosing to fight rather than surrender. As Clark's squad regrouped at the extraction point, she realized they had done something unprecedented. They had fought a ground engagement against the swarm and won without losing a single person to corruption, not because they were stronger or smarter than other species, but because they were comfortable being alone. Mission accomplished, she reported to the distant fleet. The colony is secured. Swarm ground forces eliminated. No human casualties. What she didn't report was how good it had felt to make her own decisions, to trust her own judgment, to fight without anyone looking over her shoulder. For the first time in her military career, Amy Clark had been truly free to be herself. And that freedom had been enough to save a world. Back in space, Lieutenant Morgan was having similar thoughts as he piloted the Defiance toward the fleet rendezvous point. The battle had been terrifying, but also exhilarating. Every choice had been his to make, every risk his to take, every victory his to claim. "Alice," he said to the ship's AI, "I think I'm starting to understand why this works." "Please explain, Lieutenant." Morgan looked out at the stars ahead, each one representing a potential battlefield where he might have to fight alone again. Other species fight as groups because they're stronger together, but humans fight as individuals because we're comfortable being alone. The swarm can corrupt unity, but they can't corrupt solitude. An interesting observation. Do you believe this tactical advantage will be sufficient to defeat the swarm threat? I don't know, Morgan admitted. But I know one thing for sure. They picked the wrong species to mess with. Humans have been practicing. Colonel Pete Davis stood in the observation deck of Luna Base, watching the strangest military training exercise in human history. Below him on the lunar surface, 200 volunteers practiced fighting an enemy that no military academy had ever prepared them for. They moved across the gray landscape in complete isolation, each soldier operating as if they were the only person in the universe. "This goes against everything we know about warfare," said Captain Holly Richards, joining Davis at the viewing window. She commanded the 1st Official Solo Corps Training Battalion, and the stress of the assignment showed in her tired eyes. "I keep wanting to order them to coordinate, to support each other, to work as a team." Davis nodded, understanding her frustration. "The psychological conditioning is the hardest part. We're asking people to unlearn millions of years of social evolution. Humans are pack animals, just like most species. But unlike other species, we can choose to be alone when we have to. On the surface below, recruit Billy Chen was learning this lesson the hard way. He had been a squad leader in the regular Marines, comfortable with command and coordination. Now he was crawling across the lunar regolith with no communication, no backup, and no one to blame but himself if things went wrong. His training scenario was simple: infiltrate a simulated swarm position and destroy the target without any assistance. Every instinct told him to wait for support, to coordinate with nearby units, to follow established tactical doctrine. Instead, he forced himself to trust his own judgment. The simulation included psychological pressure designed to mimic swarm, mental attacks. Voices whispered in his helmet, suggesting that he join a collective consciousness, that individual action was futile, that unity was the only path to survival. Chen gritted his teeth and pushed forward, focusing on his mission, rather than the voices. "How many recruits are washing out?" Davis asked Richards. "About 60%, she replied grimly. "Most humans can handle physical isolation, but mental isolation is different. When you're truly alone with your thoughts under combat stress, some people break down. Others become paralyzed by the responsibility of making every decision themselves." Through the observation window, they watched Chen successfully complete his mission. He moved like a predator, adapting his approach based on real-time assessment rather than predetermined plans. When the simulation ended, he stood alone on the lunar surface, with no one to congratulate him, no team to celebrate with, just the quiet satisfaction of individual achievement. "But the ones who succeed," Davis said thoughtfully, "the ones who succeed are unlike anything we've ever trained before," Richards finished. "They think faster, adapt quicker, and show stress resistance levels that our psychologists say should be impossible." In another part of Luna Base, Dr. Rachel Stone was studying exactly why this seemed impossible. Her laboratory contained samples of captured swarm material, and her research was revealing disturbing truths about humanity's enemy. "The Void Swarm isn't just a species," she explained to her research team. "It's a form of life that exists by consuming the connections between other living beings, telepathic links, emotional bonds, social structures, even simple cooperation. All of it becomes food for the swarm." Her assistant, Dr. Tony Martinez, looked at the writhing specimen in the containment field. "How does it consume something like cooperation?" "Think of it as a parasite that feeds on information flow between minds," Stone replied. "When two beings communicate, there's an exchange of thoughts, emotions, and intentions. The swarm intercepts that exchange and uses it to gradually take control of both minds." She activated a holographic display showing neural patterns from various species. "Look at this. Altarian minds during fleet operations show massive information exchange, thousands of thoughts shared per second, perfect for swarm consumption. Corvan pack hunters have constant emotional bonding that the swarm can exploit. Every species we've studied has some form of mental connection that makes them vulnerable." "Except humans?" Martinez asked. Stone pulled up human neural scans from solo operations. Human minds during isolated combat show something remarkable. Instead of seeking connection with other minds, they actually strengthen their individual processing capabilities. We become more ourselves when we're alone, not less. Meanwhile, on Earth, the political implications of humanity's new role were becoming clear. Ambassador Kelly Martinez sat in an emergency session with representatives from 12 major species. The meeting was being held in Earth's orbital station, since alien delegates were now afraid to get too close to active human military units. "You must understand our concern," said Ambassador Zelith of the Crystalline Collective. "Your species is becoming increasingly isolated from galactic society. Solo Corps soldiers show decreased empathy, reduced social bonding, and concerning levels of independence." Kelly had seen the psychological reports. Solo Corps veterans struggled to reintegrate with normal society after extended missions. They made decisions without consulting others, trusted their own judgment over group consensus, and showed little interest in social activities that other humans enjoyed. "We're becoming what we need to become to save the galaxy," Kelly replied. Carefully, "The alternative is extinction for all of us." "But at what cost?" asked the empathic union representative. "We can feel the emotional isolation of your soldiers. They're cutting themselves off from the very connections that make life meaningful." Admiral Kevin Shaw spoke up from his position at the table. "The cost is what it has to be. Every Solo Corps volunteer knew the risks when they signed up. They're sacrificing their social bonds to preserve everyone else's right to have them." The meeting was interrupted by an urgent message from the frontier. 3 more star systems had fallen to the swarm in the past week, despite increased Solo Corps deployments. The enemy was adapting faster than anyone had expected. Commander Lisa Ward delivered the briefing via secure transmission. "The swarm is changing its tactics. Instead of direct confrontation, they're using psychological warfare specifically designed to target human weaknesses. They've figured out that while we're immune to their collective corruption, we're vulnerable to other forms of mental attack." She showed footage from the recent battle at Tau Ceti. Solo Corps fighters had engaged swarm forces successfully, but several pilots reported strange hallucinations during combat. Visions of their families in danger, sounds of loved ones calling for help, false memories of betrayal by fellow humans. "They're learning to attack our individuality instead of trying to override it," Ward explained, "making us doubt ourselves, question our isolation, long for connection, even when connection means death." Back on Luna Base, this new intelligence was already being incorporated into training. Captain Richards watched her recruits face psychological simulations designed to exploit every human weakness the swarm had discovered. Recruit Sarah Williams found herself in a scenario where her isolated position was supposedly compromised, and voices that sounded like her family begged her to abandon her mission and come home. The rational part of her mind knew it was simulation, but the emotional impact was devastating. "Focus on the mission," she told herself, forcing her way through the exercise. "The mission is real. Everything else is just noise." She succeeded, but Richards could see the cost written on her face. Every Solo Corps soldier was being asked to choose between their human need for connection and their duty to protect that same need in others. Dr. Stone's research team made another breakthrough that week. Analysis of swarm neural patterns revealed that the enemy had its own form of weakness. The collective consciousness that made them so dangerous also made them predictable in certain ways. "They think as one mind," Stone explained to the assembled military leaders. "That means they have trouble processing truly random or unpredictable behavior. Human individuality isn't just immune to their attacks, it's actually toxic to their mental processes." Colonel Davis saw the implications immediately. "So the more chaotic and unpredictable our tactics become, the more effective we are against them." Exactly. Military doctrine based on rules and procedures is what they can understand and counter. But a human making split-second decisions based on intuition and personal experience, that's something their collective mind can't process effectively. This led to the development of the Chaos Protocol, the most unusual military doctrine ever created. Solo Corps soldiers were specifically trained to abandon conventional tactics and trust their instincts. Plans were kept deliberately vague, objectives were defined broadly, and individual commanders were encouraged to improvise rather than follow standard procedures. The psychological impact on the soldiers was profound. They were being asked to become something that no human had ever been before. Warriors who fought best when they fought alone, thinkers who were strongest when they trusted only themselves, heroes who saved civilization by cutting themselves off from it. Captain Richards watched her latest graduating class receive their Solo Corps insignia. These 50 men and women would deploy to combat zones across the galaxy, each one fighting alone against an enemy that consumed entire civilizations. They would make life-or-death decisions with no guidance, face impossible odds with no backup, and carry the... Major Tony Carter had been alone for 16 days when the Battle of Wolf 359 began. His single-seat fighter drifted silently through the asteroid field, one of 47 individual human pilots scattered across the system. Each pilot operated independently, with no communication between them and no coordinated battle plan. To any outside observer, it looked like the most disorganized military force in galactic history. Carter preferred it that way. 3 months of Solo Corps missions had taught him that his own judgment was more reliable than any tactical computer or command structure. When the swarm fleet dropped out of hyperspace, 63 vessels moving in perfect formation, he didn't wait for orders that would never come. He simply analyzed the situation and acted. The swarm ships moved like a single organism, each vessel positioned with mathematical precision relative to all others. Their formation was beautiful in its perfection, a testament to the collective consciousness that controlled every movement. It was also exactly the kind of predictable behavior that human chaos protocols were designed to exploit. Carter fired his engines and accelerated toward the enemy fleet, not because any tactical manual recommended it, but because his gut told him the swarm wouldn't expect such a direct approach. Behind him, 46 other pilots made their own independent decisions about how to engage. Some chose stealth approaches, others went for long-range attacks, and a few decided to wait and observe. There was no coordination, no mutual support, and no overall strategy beyond destroy the enemy. The swarm collective mind tried to process what it was facing. According to their experience with thousands of other species, the approaching human vessels should have been communicating with each other, sharing targeting data, and coordinating their attacks. Instead, the swarm detected 47 completely separate decision-making processes, each one acting on different information and following different tactical approaches. Lieutenant Kelly Brooks chose that moment to demonstrate why human unpredictability was so effective. Instead of engaging the main swarm fleet, she turned her fighter toward what appeared to be empty space and began firing at nothing. The swarm collective puzzled over this apparently senseless action for 3 crucial seconds before realizing that Brooks had somehow detected their cloaked command vessel. The hidden ship exploded in a burst of exotic energy, and suddenly the perfect swarm formation began to show gaps and hesitation. Their collective decision-making process faltered as they tried to understand how a lone human pilot had found a target that their own ships couldn't detect. Brooks had succeeded not through superior sensors or tactical genius, but through pure human intuition. Something about the empty space had felt wrong to her, so she had investigated. No committee would have approved such a decision. No tactical computer would have recommended it. But her individual human mind had processed subtle environmental cues that the swarm collective had missed. The battle escalated as more pilots engaged on their own terms. Captain Rick Davis chose to ram his damaged fighter into a swarm cruiser rather than retreat, taking out both ships in a massive explosion. His sacrifice wasn't part of any grand strategy. It was simply his personal decision that his death would be more useful than his survival. Commander Patricia Webb took the opposite approach, using hit-and-run tactics to harass the enemy fleet while avoiding direct confrontation. Her fighter danced between asteroids, striking at targets of opportunity, and then disappearing before the swarm could respond. She had no support, no backup, and no escape plan beyond her own skill and luck. The swarm collective began to experience something unprecedented: confusion. For millions of years, they had consumed species that fought as unified organisms. They understood pack tactics, hive mind strategies, and collective decision-making. But 47 individual humans, each making separate choices based on personal assessment, was beyond their ability to process effectively. Major Carter found himself in close combat with 3 swarm fighters. Standard doctrine would call for him to retreat and request support, but Solo Corps training had taught him to embrace the chaos of individual combat. He flew his ship in patterns that no textbook would recommend, making split-second decisions that even he couldn't predict in advance. The swarm pilots tried to anticipate his moves by analyzing his flight patterns, but Carter wasn't following any pattern. He was simply reacting to immediate threats with the same instinctive responses that had helped his ancestors survive on ancient Earth. When a swarm ship moved to block his escape route, he didn't calculate the optimal counter-maneuver. He just did whatever felt right. It worked. The 3 swarm fighters, designed to respond to predictable tactical behavior, found themselves unable to match Carter's chaotic approach. Within minutes, all 3 were destroyed, and Carter was already moving on to his next target. Across the system, similar scenes played out as human pilots discovered the power of fighting alone. They made mistakes that would have been impossible in a coordinated fleet, took risks that no reasonable commander would approve, and achieved victories that tactical computers said were mathematically impossible. 2,000 light-years away, Sergeant Kate Lewis was learning the same lesson on the ground. Her company had been deployed to retake the colony world of New Sparta, which had fallen to swarm ground forces 6 weeks earlier. Instead of coordinating a unified assault, each soldier in the company operated as an independent unit with their own objectives and methods. Lewis found herself clearing a residential district that had been converted into a swarm breeding facility. The once peaceful neighborhoods now pulsed with organic growth, and the former residents moved in perfect synchronization as they tended to alien egg clusters. Every instinct told her to call for backup, to coordinate with nearby units, to follow established procedures for urban combat. Instead, she trusted her own assessment of the situation. The swarm ground forces were expecting an organized assault with predictable patterns and coordinated timing. They weren't prepared for one human moving through their territory like a predator, making decisions based on immediate observations rather than predetermined plans. Lewis approached each building differently, sometimes using stealth, sometimes using explosives, sometimes simply walking through the front door with weapons ready. There was no pattern to her methods because there was no plan beyond destroying everything connected to the swarm. Her unpredictability became her greatest weapon. When she encountered a group of 20 converted colonists moving in formation toward a strategic position, standard tactics would have called for her to observe and report their movements to command. Instead, Lewis made an instantaneous decision to attack immediately, using grenades to disrupt their formation and then picking off individuals as they tried to regroup. The engagement lasted less than 5 minutes, but it demonstrated the fundamental advantage of human solo tactics. The converted colonists, operating as part of the Swarm Collective, couldn't adapt quickly enough to counter Lewis's individual decision-making process. They were thinking as a group, which made them predictable. She was thinking as herself, which made her dangerous. Across New Sparta, Lewis's company achieved something unprecedented in galactic warfare history. Operating as individuals rather than a unified force, they retook an entire planet in 18 hours. Each soldier made hundreds of independent decisions, took risks that no coordinated force would accept, and succeeded through chaos rather than order. The cost was significant. 12 soldiers were killed, and another 8 were wounded, casualties that might have been prevented with proper coordination and mutual support. But the alternative, attempting a conventional assault that the swarm could predict and counter, would likely have resulted in the complete loss of the company. The alien allies watching from orbit struggled to understand what they were witnessing. The elegant Altarians found human tactics disturbing and primitive. The logical crystalline collective couldn't process how disorder could be more effective than organization. The military-minded Corvan Empire was forced to acknowledge that their concepts of honor and unit cohesion were liabilities in this new kind of warfare. General Susan Cole, observing the battle from the command ship, finally understood what Earth's military had become. "We're not training soldiers anymore," she told Admiral Shaw. "We're training predators, individual hunters who happen to be fighting on the same side." "Is that necessarily a bad thing?" Shaw asked, watching the tactical displays show human forces achieving impossible victories across multiple fronts. "I don't know," Cole admitted. "But I know this. When this war is over, we're going to have thousands of soldiers who are more comfortable fighting alone than living in society. What do we do with warriors who can't come home?" The question haunted everyone watching the Battle of Wolf 359 unfold. Humanity was winning, but at the cost of becoming something no species had ever been before, a civilization of individuals so independent that they could function effectively in complete isolation. As Major Carter's fighter limped away from the wreckage of the swarm fleet, he felt the familiar mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration that followed every solo mission. He had fought alone, decided alone, and won. Commander Alex Turner had been alone for 43 days when he reached the Vega system. His mission was simple in concept, but terrifying in execution. Infiltrate the largest swarm breeding facility ever discovered and destroy it from within. No backup, no support, no communication with Earth. Just one human against a complex that housed millions of swarm organisms. The facility orbited Vega's 4th planet like a twisted moon, its organic structure pulsing with alien life. Intelligence reports suggested it was producing new swarm vessels at a rate of 50 per day, each one adding to the forces threatening the galaxy. Turner's ship, the stealth frigate Shadow, drifted silently toward the facility's outer defenses. Biological. Sensors detect approximately 12 million swarm organisms within the target structure, his ship's AI informed him. Probability of mission success without support, less than 1%. "Thanks for the encouragement, Marcus," Turner replied, watching the facility grow larger on his screen. "Remind me again why I volunteered for this job." "Personnel records indicate you volunteered because, quote, someone has to do it and I'm tired of being afraid," end quote. Turner smiled grimly. 3 months of solo missions had taught him that fear was just another piece of information to process. The swarm facility was terrifying, but terror was a luxury he couldn't afford. He had a job to do, and he was the only person in the galaxy who could do it. The infiltration took 6 hours of careful maneuvering through organic defense networks that tried to scan his mind for hostile intentions. The swarm was looking for the coordinated thoughts of a military assault team or the collective planning of a fleet operation. Instead, they found one human mind focused entirely on immediate survival, with no grand strategy beyond getting inside, without being detected. Turner's plan, if it could be called that, was pure improvisation. He followed maintenance passages that led deeper into the facility, avoiding the main corridors where swarm organisms moved in their perfect formations. When he encountered obstacles, he dealt with them individually rather than trying to anticipate future problems. 2,000 light-years away, Dr. Sam Parker was dealing with the consequences of humanity's new way of war. His medical facility on Mars had become the primary treatment center for Solo Corps veterans suffering from what military psychologists were calling isolation syndrome. The symptoms were unlike anything seen in previous conflicts. They can't reintegrate, Parker explained to the visiting military officials. After months of operating alone, making every decision independently, trusting only their own judgment, they find normal human society overwhelming and chaotic. He led them through the treatment ward, where dozens of Solo Corps veterans struggled with everyday social interactions. Captain Jennifer Mills, a decorated pilot with 12 successful solo missions, sat in a corner of the common room, visibly uncomfortable with the presence of other people. When someone tried to start a conversation, she would analyze their words for tactical implications rather than social meaning. She's processing every human interaction as a potential threat or intelligence source, Parker continued. The neural pathways that made her effective in solo combat are interfering with normal social behavior. In another room, Lieutenant Nicole Green was undergoing therapy for decision paralysis. After months of making split-second choices with life-or-death consequences, she found herself unable to make simple decisions like what to eat for lunch or which entertainment program to watch. Without the immediate pressure of combat, her enhanced decision-making abilities had become a liability. The irony is that these are our most successful warriors, Parker told the officials. They've saved entire star systems through their individual actions. But they're paying a psychological price that we're only beginning to understand. General Susan Cole, who was leading the inspection, looked at the veterans with a mixture of pride and guilt. What's the long-term prognosis? Can they recover? Some of them, maybe, Parker admitted. But full recovery would require undoing the very mental adaptations that make them effective against the swarm. We're asking them to choose between being functional humans and being functional Solo Corps warriors. Most of them can't be both. Back in the Vega system, Turner was discovering the personal cost of his mission. Deep inside the swarm facility, surrounded by millions of hostile organisms, he felt more at peace than he had in months. The constant threat, the need for immediate decision-making, the absolute reliance on his own judgment. This was where he belonged now. He had been moving through the facility for 12 hours when he encountered something unprecedented. A group of human survivors from a destroyed colony ship. They were alive but changed, their minds partially integrated into the swarm collective while retaining their individual personalities. "Help us," they whispered in unison, their voices carrying both human emotion and alien harmonics. "We remember who we were, but we can't break free from what we've become." Turner felt the familiar pressure of swarm mental contact, attempting to establish connection with his mind. But unlike the survivors, his months of solo conditioning had strengthened his mental independence rather than weakening it. The collective, Whispers that had corrupted the colonists couldn't find purchase in a mind that had learned to function in complete isolation. "I can't save you," he told them honestly, "but I can make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else." The survivors nodded in understanding, their partially assimilated minds still capable of recognizing necessary sacrifice. They even helped him reach the facility's core, their knowledge of swarm systems guiding him through the final obstacles. It was perhaps the most human thing they could still do, helping one of their own complete a mission that would destroy them along with their captors. Meanwhile, on Earth, the political implications of the Solo Core program were creating unprecedented tensions. Ambassador Kelly Martinez faced increasingly hostile questions from alien delegates who were disturbed by humanity's psychological transformation. "Your species is becoming something unnatural," accused Ambassador Vex High of the Corvan Empire. "Warriors who feel no bond with their pack, individuals who reject all social connection. This is not evolution. It is devolution into primitive isolation." Kelly had heard these concerns before, but they stung because they contained elements of truth. Solo Corps veterans were indeed becoming less social, less empathetic, less connected to the human communities they fought to protect. The question was whether this was an acceptable price for galactic survival. "Our soldiers are sacrificing their social bonds to preserve everyone else's right to have them," Kelly replied. "If that makes them unnatural, then perhaps being unnatural is what the galaxy needs right now." The debate was interrupted by an urgent transmission from the Vega system. Turner had reached the swarm facility's core and discovered something that changed everything. The breeding facility wasn't just producing ships and ground forces. It was creating new forms of swarm organisms specifically designed to counter human solo tactics. "They're adapting faster than we expected," Turner reported through his suit's emergency transmitter. "These new organisms don't rely on collective consciousness for coordination. They're designed to think and act as individuals, just like humans." The implications were terrifying. If the swarm could create individual organisms that matched human unpredictability while retaining their technological advantages, humanity's tactical superiority would disappear. The war that Earth was winning through isolation might soon be lost for the same reason. Turner set his demolition charges throughout the facility's core, knowing that the explosion would likely kill him, along with the millions of swarm organisms. As he worked, he thought about the human survivors who had helped him, about the Solo Corps veterans struggling to reintegrate with society, about the price humanity was paying for its role as the galaxy's guardian. "Marcus," he said to his ship's AI through the communication link, "record a message for transmission to Earth Command." "Recording," the AI confirmed. "This is Commander Turner, Solo Corps, Mission 347. The Vega facility has been destroyed, but the swarm is adapting to counter our tactics. They're learning to think like individuals while maintaining their technological advantages. Recommend immediate development of new strategic approaches." He paused, thinking about what else needed to be said. To anyone listening to this recording, we're winning this war by becoming something we were never meant to be. We're saving civilization by stepping outside it. I don't know if that's heroic or tragic, but I know it's necessary. Turner out. The explosion that followed could be seen from 3 star systems away. The swarm breeding facility, along with its millions of inhabitants and its creator, vanished in a brief new star that burned for exactly 17 seconds before, fading to nothing. On Earth, the message reached military command 12 hours later. In the treatment facilities on Mars, Solo Corps veterans felt the loss of another comrade who had chosen mission success over personal survival. In the halls of the Galactic Council, alien delegates debated whether humanity's sacrifice was noble or disturbing. But in the depths of space, where other Solo Corps warriors continued their lonely missions, Turner's sacrifice was understood in the simplest. Admiral Patricia Webb stared at the tactical display showing the most ambitious military operation in galactic history. The target was beyond the edge of known space, in a region that long-range sensors suggested contained the source of the entire void swarm. Intelligence indicated that every swarm organism in the galaxy was connected to a single massive entity hidden in the Andromeda Contact Zone, a being that had been consuming civilizations for millions of years. The mission was simple, in concept. Send one human ship to destroy the core entity and end the swarm threat forever. The reality was far more complex. The journey would take months through unmapped space, followed by a battle against something that had devoured entire galaxies, and it could only be attempted by a single pilot, because any larger force would create the collective patterns the swarm could exploit. The psychological profile requirements are extreme, Dr. Linda Pierce reported to the assembled military leaders. We need someone who can function in complete isolation for extended periods, make critical decisions without any external input, and maintain mental stability while facing an enemy of unprecedented scale. General Susan Cole looked at the volunteer list. 300 Solo Corps veterans had applied for the mission, knowing it was effectively a suicide assignment. The selection process had been brutal, eliminating candidates based on psychological factors that would never have mattered. In conventional warfare, Captain Brandon Lee scores highest on all isolation parameters, Pierce continued. 6 months of solo combat experience, exceptional stress resistance, and demonstrated ability to function effectively without social contact. His psychological profile suggests he actually performs better in isolation than in group settings. Webb studied Lee's file. At 28, he had already completed more solo missions than any other pilot in the program. His combat record was flawless, but his social integration scores were among the lowest in the Solo Corps. He was exactly what the mission required. A human who had become so adapted to fighting alone that normal society was foreign to him. There's one more factor to consider, Pierce added quietly. Captain Lee shows signs of advanced isolation syndrome. If he survives this mission, he may never be able to return to normal human society. We're sending someone who might already be too damaged. To save. The room fell silent as everyone contemplated what they were asking. The mission required someone who could endure months of absolute solitude, but that same ability would likely make them incapable of ever connecting with other humans again. In another part of the facility, Captain Lee was undergoing final preparations for the mission. The ship designed for the operation was unlike anything in human naval history. The experimental vessel Pioneer was built for single-person operation, with automated systems handling everything that would normally require a crew. It was less a warship than a hermitage with weapons. The journey to the Andromeda Contact Zone will take approximately 4 months, explained the mission briefer. You'll be alone the entire time, with no communication possible once you leave the galaxy. The ship's AI will provide basic interaction, but you'll essentially be cut off from all human contact until you return. Lee nodded calmly. The prospect of 4 months alone in space didn't frighten him. It appealed to him. After 18 months of solo combat missions, he found human company increasingly difficult to tolerate. People asked too many questions, expressed too many emotions, and made too many assumptions about shared experiences he no longer possessed. What about the target itself? Lee asked. Unknown, the briefer admitted. Long-range sensors suggest a structure the size of a small moon, but we have no information about its defenses or capabilities. You'll be making tactical decisions based on real-time assessment with no backup data or support recommendations. That was exactly how Lee preferred to operate. Pre-planned missions with detailed intelligence reports felt constraining after months of improvised solo combat. He worked best when forced to rely entirely on his own judgment and reflexes. While Lee prepared for his solitary mission, General Michelle Adams was coordinating the largest diversion operation in human history. Every available Solo Corps unit would launch simultaneous attacks across the galaxy, creating enough chaos to mask Lee's approach to the core entity. It was a plan that required thousands of individual humans to act independently while serving a unified strategic purpose. The irony wasn't lost on Adams. Humanity was achieving perfect military coordination through complete lack of coordination. Each Solo Corps warrior would make their own decisions about how and when to attack, but their collective chaos would create the cover Lee needed for his mission. "This is the opposite of everything we learned in military school," Adams told her staff. "We're orchestrating a galactic campaign by specifically avoiding orchestration. Every unit commander will receive the same basic objective: create maximum disruption. And then we're trusting them to figure out how to achieve it." The launch preparations took 3 weeks, during which Lee spent most of his time alone in the Pioneer, familiarizing himself with systems designed for solitary operation. The ship's AI, designated Marcus, was programmed to provide minimal interaction, enough to prevent complete sensory deprivation, but not enough to compromise Lee's mental independence. "Are you concerned about the psychological impact of extended isolation?" Marcus asked during one of their rare conversations. "No," Lee replied honestly. "I'm more concerned about going back to dealing with other people when this is over." An interesting perspective. Do you consider this preference for isolation to be healthy? Lee thought about the question while performing his pre-flight checks. Healthy for what? For normal human society? Probably not. For fighting the swarm? Definitely. Yes, I've become what the situation requires me to be. The departure was deliberately low-key. No ceremonies, no speeches, no crowds to see him off. Lee preferred it that way. The Pioneer lifted off from Luna Base during a routine maintenance window, just another ship heading for the outer system. Only a few dozen people knew that this unremarkable launch was humanity's last desperate gamble for survival. As the Pioneer cleared Earth's gravitational influence and engaged its experimental drive systems, Lee felt the familiar sense of relief that came with being truly alone. No voices on the communication channels, no tactical coordination requirements, no need to consider anyone else's opinions or feelings. Just him, his ship, and the vast emptiness of space. The journey through normal space took 6 weeks, during which Lee established the routines that would sustain him through the months ahead. Physical exercise, equipment maintenance, tactical planning, and carefully rationed social interaction with Marcus. He found the isolation peaceful rather than disturbing, a confirmation that his psychological adaptation to solo warfare was complete. The transition to intergalactic space marked the point of no return. Beyond the edge of the Milky Way, there were no navigation beacons, no communication relays, and no hope of rescue if something went wrong. Lee was truly alone in a way that few humans in history had ever experienced. Beginning final approach to target coordinates, Marcus announced after 4 months of silent travel. Sensors detect massive artificial structure bearing 45 Mark 12, configuration unknown. Energy readings suggest active systems. Through the Pioneer's viewports, Lee could see their destination, a structure that dwarfed anything in human experience. It looked less like a ship or station than like a cancerous growth on reality itself, all twisted organic curves and surfaces that seemed to move in impossible ways. This was the source of the Void Swarm, the entity that had been consuming galaxies for millions of years. Tactical analysis? Lee asked. Insufficient data for meaningful analysis, Marcus replied. Recommend extreme caution and preparedness for unprecedented enemy capabilities. Lee smiled grimly as he began his final approach. After months of preparation, all the planning and analysis came down to the same thing every solo core mission required. One human making individual decisions in real time, trusting personal judgment over any external authority. Beginning final. Attack run, he announced to the empty ship. If anyone's listening to this recording, the swarm core is everything intelligence suggested and worse. I'm going in alone, as planned. If I don't make it back, tell Earth that humans kept their promise. We stood alone against the dark and we didn't flinch. The final battle for galactic civilization was about to begin, and it would be fought by one human pilot who had become so adapted to isolation that he preferred the company of cosmic horrors to his own kind. Whether that made him humanity's greatest hero or its most tragic victim remained to be seen. The Pioneer accelerated toward the ancient enemy, carrying with it the hopes of every species in the galaxy and the individual will of one human who had learned to fight alone in the infinite dark. Captain Brandon Lee faced the swarm core in the depths of intergalactic space, and for the first time in months, he wasn't alone. The ancient entity reached out with tendrils of pure thought, trying to establish the mental connections it had used to consume countless civilizations. But instead of the collective consciousness it expected, it found something unprecedented. A single human mind that had been shaped by isolation into something entirely new. The core entity was massive beyond comprehension, a twisted fusion of organic matter and dark energy that had grown for millions of years by consuming the mental bonds between living beings. It had devoured entire galaxies by turning unity into weakness, cooperation into corruption. Now it faced something it had never encountered, a mind that was stronger alone than it could ever be with others. Fascinating. The entity spoke directly into Lee's consciousness, its voice carrying the accumulated wisdom of 1 billion consumed species. You are isolated, yet you function. Alone, yet unbroken. How is this possible? Lee guided the Pioneer through defensive fire that bent space itself, making tactical decisions with the speed and precision that months of solo combat had developed. You wouldn't understand, he replied, not even sure if the entity could hear his thoughts. You've spent millions of years learning that connection is strength. Humans spent millions of years learning that sometimes you have to stand alone. Rao. Entities' attacks intensified, waves of psychic pressure designed to overwhelm individual consciousness and force integration into the collective. Lee felt the familiar sensation of something vast and hungry trying to get inside his mind. But his months of isolation had built mental barriers the swarm had never encountered before. Join us, the entity whispered, its voice now carrying the tones of every species it had consumed. Experience perfect unity. Know the thoughts of countless beings. End your loneliness forever. For a moment, Lee actually considered the offer. The entity was promising everything that solo core conditioning had trained him to reject. Connection, understanding, shared experience. After months of fighting alone, the prospect of joining something larger was genuinely tempting, but then he remembered Commander Turner's sacrifice at Vega, Sergeant Lewis's squad retaking New Sparta, and all the other humans who had chosen isolation over unity to protect the galaxy. They had paid the price of loneliness so that others wouldn't have to. "Thanks, but no," Lee said, firing the Pioneer's main weapons directly into the entity's core. "I've gotten used to being alone. The battle that followed was unlike anything. In galactic history, Lee found himself fighting not just a single enemy, but the absorbed consciousness of every civilization the entity had consumed. Voices in his mind spoke in languages that had been dead for millennia, offering knowledge, power, and perfect understanding in exchange for surrender. What the entity couldn't comprehend was that Lee's isolation wasn't a weakness to be exploited. It was a weapon that had been forged through months of solo combat. His mind didn't seek connection with other consciousness because it had learned to be complete in itself. The entity's greatest strength, its ability to turn social bonds into chains, was useless against someone who had transcended the need for social bonds. "You are broken," the entity declared as Lee's attacks began to damage its core structure. "No healthy mind chooses absolute solitude. You have been twisted by your species into something unnatural." "Maybe," Lee admitted, maneuvering the Pioneer through defenses that defied physics. "But unnatural seems to work pretty well against you." The entity tried a different approach, showing Lee visions of what he had lost by choosing isolation. Images of family gatherings he would never attend, friendships he would never form, love he would never experience. The lonely path of the solo core warrior was laid bare in all its tragic necessity. "This is what your species has become," the entity taunted. "Warriors who save civilization by abandoning it. Heroes who protect love by rejecting it. You have won this war by losing your humanity." Lee felt the truth in those words, but he also felt something else: acceptance. He had become exactly what the galaxy needed him to become. The price was heavy, but it was a price he had chosen to pay. "Human enough," he said, and triggered the Pioneer's self-destruct sequence. The explosion that followed was visible from 3 galaxies away. The entity that had consumed civilizations for millions of years died in 17 seconds of pure human stubbornness, taking with it the consciousness of every swarm organism in existence. Across the galaxy, swarm fleets suddenly went dormant, as their controlling intelligence simply ceased to exist. The victory was absolute, instant, and irreversible. Humanity had saved galactic civilization through the actions of one man who had become so isolated that he could face cosmic horrors without flinching. But the cost of that victory was still being counted when the first reports reached Earth. 5 years after the Battle of the Core, Captain Julie Foster stood in the Memorial Garden on Luna Base, reading the names of solo core warriors who had never returned from their missions. The war was over, the galaxy was safe, and humanity had taken its place as the premier military force in galactic civilization. But the price of victory was written in the isolation of those who had survived. Foster herself was a product of the new reality. Trained in the solo core doctrine that had won the war, she was part of a permanent institution that would guard against future threats. Her generation of warriors had never known anything but individual combat, isolation protocols, and the psychological strength that came from standing alone. "The memorial ceremony will begin in 10 minutes, announced her aide, a young officer who still seemed uncomfortable with the social distance that Solo Corps veterans maintained even in normal conversation. Foster nodded but didn't move from her position among the memorial stones. Each one represented a human who had chosen to fight alone so that others could live together. The irony wasn't lost on her. The most social species in the galaxy had been saved by their most antisocial members. The ceremony itself was a quiet affair, attended by alien dignitaries, military officials, and the families of fallen warriors. Ambassador Kelly Martinez, now representing Earth's interests as the galaxy's leading military power, spoke about the sacrifice of those who had died, alone in the dark so that civilization could survive. They gave up their connections to preserve our right to have them, Martinez said. Her words carried to every world in the galaxy. They chose isolation so that we could choose unity. They became something inhuman so that the rest of us could remain human. In the years since the war's end, the psychological cost of the Solo Corps program had become clear. Veterans struggled with social integration, forming a distinct subculture within human society. They lived in separate communities, worked in specialized roles, and maintained the emotional distance that had made them effective warriors. Some saw this as tragic, a lost generation sacrificed for galactic survival. Others saw it as evolutionary, adaptation, humans who had transcended the need for social bonds and become something new. The debate continued in universities and government chambers, but the Solo Corps veterans themselves seemed indifferent to the discussion. They had found their own form of community, warriors who understood isolation, who could function in the spaces between civilizations, who stood ready to face threats that no unified force could handle. They were humanity's guardians, watching the dark places where collective consciousness became vulnerability. Foster's current assignment exemplified this new role. She commanded a squadron of single-ship patrols monitoring the outer galactic rim for signs of new threats. Each pilot operated independently, covering vast regions of space that would have required entire fleets in the old days. They communicated when necessary, but preferred the solitude of deep space to the crowded systems of the inner galaxy. Contact, came the report from Lieutenant Mike Chen, operating 3 star systems away. Unknown energy signature bearing 180, Mark 45. Doesn't match any known technology. Foster felt the familiar thrill of individual decision-making. In the old military, this would trigger committee meetings, tactical consultations, and coordinated response protocols.